"Here's $500. Will you pretend to be my date for a day?" asked the lonely CEO to the girl at the cafe. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the streets of New York in a gray mist that made everything feel a little heavier than usual. Inside a small, dimly lit cafe on the corner of Fifth Avenue, a young woman sat by the window, her fingers tracing circles on her half-empty cup of coffee. Her name was Lena Carter, a 24-year-old waitress who had just lost her second job this month. The bills were piling up, the rent was overdue, and the tiny hope she'd been clinging to was fading with every drip from the leaking ceiling above her. But that evening, fate decided to stop by, wearing a navy blue suit, a silver watch that cost more than her yearly rent, and eyes that carried the quiet weight of 1,000 lonely nights. His name was Ethan Hale, the CEO of Hale Enterprises, a man who had everything the world said you should want: money, power, success, but not peace, not love. He sat 3 tables away, staring into his untouched espresso like it held the answers to everything he'd lost. On the surface, he looked calm, but behind that polished mask was a man who hadn't spoken to his family in years, who had built his empire out of anger, and who had forgotten what it felt like to laugh without pretending. That night, he was supposed to attend a grand company gala, a charity event where every camera and investor would be watching him. But what the world didn't know was that it wasn't business pressure that scared him. It was seeing his ex-fiancée there, the woman who had left him 3 years ago for his best friend. And so, he sat there, torn between going and disappearing, until his eyes met Lena's. Sparkles, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and how one small act can change 2 lives forever. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Sparkles. Lena didn't look like anyone special, yet there was something about her. Maybe it was the way her eyes still held warmth, even after the world had been unfair to her. Or the way she smiled politely at strangers despite being tired, hungry, and unsure of tomorrow. Ethan couldn't look away. He didn't even realize when he stood up and walked toward her table, his hand trembling slightly as he placed a crisp envelope in front of her. Inside it was $500. Lena froze. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake, but Ethan's voice was low, calm, and broken in a way that made her forget to breathe. He said he needed a date for a few hours, not love, not anything improper, just someone to sit beside him, smile, and make the night less lonely. He said he'd pay her for her time. Lena hesitated. She didn't know who he really was, only that the sadness in his eyes felt familiar. $500 was more than her entire week's pay. But it wasn't about the money. Something about him told her this was more than just an offer. It was a silent cry for help from someone who didn't know how to ask. And so, with a cautious heart, she said yes. That evening, Ethan's sleek black car pulled up to the cafe. Lena stepped out in a borrowed navy dress from her roommate, her hair tied up neatly, her nerves a storm inside her chest. The gala was held in a golden ballroom filled with chandeliers, laughter, and shallow compliments. Everyone looked perfect, except the 2 people pretending to be. As they entered hand in hand, heads turned, cameras flashed. To the crowd, they looked like a couple, confident and glamorous. But inside, both were hiding behind invisible walls. Ethan kept introducing her as Lena, someone special, and every time he said it, she saw a flicker of truth in his eyes. Maybe, for one night, he needed to believe it. Hours passed. Between champagne glasses and polite smiles, Lena started noticing things. The way Ethan's hands shook slightly when someone mentioned his ex. The way he looked away every time laughter filled the room. The loneliness in his voice when he said he hadn't been home for Christmas in years. She realized that beneath the success and the fame, he was just another lost soul, one who had built walls so high even he couldn't see over them anymore. At one point, as they stood by the balcony overlooking the city, Ethan quietly confessed that he hadn't spoken to anyone about his feelings in years. "People expect CEOs to be strong," he murmured, "but no one ever asks if we're happy." Lena didn't reply. She just stood beside him, letting the silence be his comfort. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the city lights, something unexplainable shifted. For the first time in years, Ethan smiled, not the kind he used for the cameras, but a real, fragile one that came from somewhere deep. The night ended with applause and fake smiles, but as they stepped out of the ballroom, neither wanted it to be over. Ethan offered to drop her home, but instead, they stopped by a late-night diner. Over pancakes and coffee, they talked for hours about dreams, fears, and everything in between. Lena told him about her struggles, how life hadn't been easy, but she still believed that kindness could save anyone. Ethan listened quietly, and when she laughed, he realized it was the first sound that had made him feel alive in years. When he dropped her off that night, he handed her the envelope again, but Lena pushed it back into his hand, shaking her head. She said she didn't want his money, that the evening had meant something to her, too. Ethan was speechless. No one had ever refused him anything before. Days turned into weeks. Ethan found himself coming back to that same cafe, not for coffee, but for her. Lena would always be there, serving customers, smiling through exhaustion, sometimes sketching small dreams on napkins during breaks. They started talking more. Slowly, quietly, their worlds began to intertwine. For the first time in years, Ethan started showing up to work with a smile. His employees noticed he was calmer, kinder, and more patient. Lena had unknowingly reminded him of what truly mattered, not wealth, not power, but connection. But just when things were beginning to heal, reality came crashing back. One afternoon, a photo of Ethan and Lena from the parlor went viral online. Headlines exploded. Unknown waitress spotted with billionaire CEO. Rumors spread fast. People at the cafe began whispering. Lena's manager fired her, afraid of bad publicity. And Ethan's board of directors began questioning his judgment, warning him to stay away from her. Lena, embarrassed and heartbroken, disappeared without a word. She packed her few belongings and left the city, not wanting to be a reason for someone else's downfall. Ethan searched everywhere. He called her, visited her old apartment, even went back to the cafe, but she was gone. For weeks, he couldn't focus. The world saw a CEO losing control, but what they didn't know was that he wasn't losing control. He was losing the only person who had made him feel human again. Months passed before he finally found her in a small seaside town, working at a bookshop. She looked different, peaceful, but sad. When she saw him standing at the door, she froze. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there in the soft sunlight filtering through the windows, holding the same envelope he'd once given her. He told her he didn't want to offer money this time. He wanted to offer something real, his heart, his honesty, and a promise that he'd never let her go again. Lena's eyes filled with tears, not because of the words, but because she could feel they were true. They spent the entire evening walking by the shore, talking about everything that had happened. Ethan admitted that the parlor had been the loneliest night of his life before she said yes. Lena smiled and said maybe fate had its strange ways of bringing two broken people together, not to complete each other, but to remind each other that broken things can still be beautiful. Years later, that cafe on Fifth Avenue became something more. Ethan bought it and renamed it Leaner's Corner. It wasn't a fancy place, just cozy, warm, and full of laughter. Every weekend, they'd sit by the same window where their story began, watching the rain fall and remembering how it all started, with $500, a desperate heart, and a girl who said yes. Read, if this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. Red speech balloon. Before you go, tell us in the comments, would you have said yes to a stranger asking you to pretend for a day if it could change your life forever? And maybe that's what life is, a collection of unexpected moments where strangers become stories, and one small act of kindness can rewrite two destinies. Because sometimes, love doesn't come dressed in perfection. It comes quietly as a question at a cafe table that changes everything.